Cheers for download. If you enjoy what we do, then please help us spread the word by hitting like on Spotify, iTunes, or anywhere else you get your pods from. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, a quick 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening makes a huge difference in reaching new listeners. If you'd like to go one step further, you can support the show directly through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. And a big thanks to everybody who's chipped in already. It really helps keep the production costs down and the podcast going strong. Right, admin out of the way. My guest today is former reserve infantry soldier Matt Okuhara, whose story shines a light on the often overlooked role of the British Army Reserves. Matt grew up in rural Gloucestershire and joined the TA when he was working in the banking sector. Shortly after completing basic and infantry training, he was mobilised for Operation TELIC 4. He takes us through his pre-deployment training, the realities of patrolling Basra under the threat of IEDs and militia attacks, and the contact that changed everything for him. We'll also hear about the struggles of returning to civilian life, the loss of comrades, and how he channeled these experiences into writing his book, Basra and Back, the Memoir of an Unlikely Infantryman in the Iraq War. Let's crack on. Matt wrote the following to me in an email, and I think it captures perfectly the reality of operations most servicemen and women, regardless of regiment or arm of service, will recognise. We expect war books to be loud. Explosions, firefights, heroism, maybe a dash of trauma. Basra and Back isn't that kind of book. There are no clear villains, no grand speeches, no final act redemption. Just soldiers, sweat, kit that doesn't work, and days that blur together until one of them doesn't. Writing this book, I wasn't interested in glorifying my time in Iraq, nor was I trying to unravel it with psychological analysis. I just wanted to tell the truth as it was lived, fractured, human, occasionally surreal. A truth built from the space between incidents. The waiting, the joking, the broken air conditioning, the calluses, the tea-making, the injuries that get ignored. Most soldiering isn't combat, it's routine, paperwork, route planning, patrols, stacking sandbags, checking fluid levels. You do the same things every day until something snaps. Someone passes out, an IED goes off, or you get a knock on the door telling you the general wants a brew and you're the chatty little twat who's been picked for tea duty. It's this rhythm, boredom cut with bursts of chaos, that defines life on deployment. It's what I've tried to capture. The reality that the body breaks before the spirit does. That blood and sweat matter as much as bullets. That grief sometimes arrives in the form of a woman screaming outside a hospital, then disappears without explanation. There's a lot about war that doesn't make sense until later. Why we patrolled in Northern Ireland era Land Rovers in southern Iraq. Why private contractors had better gear, better sunglasses and better pay, despite doing what looked like less work. Why a cracked thumbnail from a slammed vehicle door hurt worse than some wounds we treated in the field. There's no single message in Basra and Back, but there are questions. What is a soldier worth? What do we carry home with us? Who gets remembered and who gets written out? These aren't grand political arguments. They're the kind of things you think about while sweeping sand out of a ready room or watching Love Actually for the 5th time because someone broke the DVD player again. One question I get asked is whether the humour in the book is a mask. Isn't it all just deflection? Maybe, but I don't think so. The dry humour, the swearing, the mockery, it's culture, not coping. It's how we talk to each other, how we survive the job, the heat, the boredom, the absurdity of taking enemy fire in 1 hour and cleaning blood out of your kit the next. It's not a punchline, it's punctuation. When Uzi asked me to pop the blood blister under his nail with a red-hot needle, it wasn't about being tough, it was about trust, about not making a big deal of pain, about knowing that the job carries on and you still have to carry the ECM even if your thumb's knackered. I didn't write Basra and Back to make a political point, but I can tell you this. The people on the ground always know more than the posters in the recruiting office. We know what works and what doesn't. We know what it means to carry weight, to drag stretchers, to sweat through the night, to get handed accommodation that doesn't match what we remember. This is a book for those who are there, and for those who weren't but want to understand. It's not tidy, and neither was the war. It's a collection of moments, stitched together like torn webbing, held in place with a bit of speed tape and dry sarcasm. And if you've served or worked alongside those who have, you'll recognise the smell, the sound, the shape of it. You'll know this story, even if it wasn't yours. Matt, thanks for coming on the podcast. And what I'd like to do is just step back a little bit and just give us a brief overview of your childhood.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on. Well, I had a pretty good childhood, I think, compared to some of the other people. I've listened to a few of your podcasts before, and some people have had harder upbringings than me, that's for certain. I grew up in Gloucestershire, rural Gloucestershire at that, so it was nice. My parents did separate when I was 14, and that had an effect on me, but it led me down a good path. So growing up, I went to a decent school, and I lived in a really, really beautiful part of the country.
And what made you join the T819, and why did you pick the Royal Gloucester, Berkshire and Wiltshire Regiment, and more specifically the Infantry?
Like I said, my parents, they separated when I was 14, and my mother continued to live in rural Gloucestershire. My father moved into the city. And so whenever I wanted to go and visit him, because I lived with my mother, I had to go down this big, long road in the middle of Gloucester, past the TA Centre, or the Reservist Centre, as it's called now. And I guess it was kind of like vicariously or insidiously sort of caught up on me. But every time I drove on the way there, they had this Saxon armoured car outside and a 105mm field gun and a big sign that said, it's part-time, but it's a real soldier's job. And his soldiers looking all very sort of early 90s. Driving on the way home, of course, I saw that again and again and again. I've always had an interest in the military, a genuine interest in the military. And I was considering joining the army full-time. However, I was lucky enough to get a job in finance at a very young age. So I was getting considerably more than an officer cadet or a lieutenant or a private would get. I went with the money. I went the mercenary route. I took the money, but I also took the opportunity to join the TA, the nearest unit to me, which was the Gloucesters, and I knew their history pretty well because there was an infantry unit there, along with the signals and a medical unit. I thought, well, I want to be in the infantry.
You joined up. What was your basic and other training like?
Basic training was pretty basic for me. I mean, when they say basic, I mean they're really taking the piss with the word basic. I did 5 weekends for phase 1, and when they say a weekend, and you know this being a PSI, the Friday don't really count because that's just getting you from the TA centre to wherever the training is going to be. So no training on that day. 4-day training on Saturday, and then we finished by lunchtime on Sunday. So what looks like on paper a full weekend of training is only a day and a half. So I did those 5 weekends, and that qualified me phase 1. I was a soldier. And then I went to phase 2 training, which was the combat infantryman's course. And that was done over 2 weeks. I ran out of Catterick, and I ended up with a certificate. So by the time I was a qualified soldier, I guess I'd done, not including the day off we had in between the 2 weeks at Catterick, that'd be 5, 10, about 18, 19 days worth of training to be a qualified soldier in the eyes of the TA at the time.
And sorry, what year was this?
2004. It crossed over 2003 to 2004, so winter 2003 to spring 2004.
At that time, had Operation TELIC 1 occurred?
TELIC 1 had happened, yeah. I was doing basic training whilst TELIC 1 was going on.
And when you were going through training, was there any sort of talks from the instructors saying that there's a chance that you could go to war?
No, complete opposite. They said, don't worry about going to war. We've only had one call up from Gloucester, and that's because she was a good clerk, and they sent her out to Bosnia back in the mid-90s, and they said, oh, no, we're not going anywhere. No one had any inclination at all that they were going to do it.
Quite an interesting paragraph in your book about when you actually receive those call-up papers. And I'll let you explain that, but how did you find out you'd been called up for TELIC 4, and what was the mobilisation and pre-deployment training process like as a reservist?
Well, how did it happen? Okay, so it was a Saturday and I was 19 and I worked in finance, so having a weekend off, that was nice, you know. Finance is stressful, man. So I went downstairs and, yeah, it was a big house we live in, so downstairs, and I go to the mail's kept on a separate place to them, picked up a big envelope. Oh, great, it's a big brown envelope. I'd spoken to the Lieutenant Colonel about possibly going on a course, like a pre-officer's course, or maybe even trying to get myself onto the interview board. And it said, on Her Majesty's service on this envelope. And I thought, oh, that could be it. I'll get a coffee first. So I got this coffee and thought, well, what should I have for breakfast? So anyway, I opened up this letter, pulled it up, and it had my name on it. It said, you know, Private 251738850. And I thought, oh, okay, that's me. And it said, notice of compulsory call out. You are joking, right? Like I said, I've been in 18, 19, 20 days worth of experience. And this piece of paper comes through. My ass just literally fell out. And I thought, this is a problem. This is a problem, because it really came like a bolt out of the blue.
Was it feelings of anger or fear or a mixture?
Yeah, I guess there wasn't anger because, I wasn't angry about it. I don't get angry about that sort of thing. But yeah, I guess I was pretty, I think it's because I didn't anticipate it. And because I was so young, I didn't have a way to process something that monumental. I mean, nothing had ever had, the most independence I'd ever had before was because I was good at music and I went on a school music tour in Switzerland this one time. And of course, you're being chaperoned by teachers and the older students. That was my independence. And then basic training as well. I was still wet behind the ears. I looked very young. I was basically a boy still. And it's the good NCOs looking after you and that sort of thing. And then this comes on like, oh, bloody hell. My first words, how am I going to tell my mum about this? So that's the first thing I thought. Then we started moving, getting the ball moving. Eventually I did get around to doing all the admin, getting a will and all this stuff before returning for Chilwell, which is where the mobilisation happened. But I thought, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. No one's told me how to do any of this. So it was a shock.
So talk us through the mobilisation and pre-deployment training that you did.
Well, I sent a message to my section leader. There's a guy called Foz. He, short for Foster, and he texted back almost immediately and says, yeah, I got my 18 to 30 holiday brochure as well. So like a bit of hyperbole with it. And I was like, okay. And I texted around other people I knew who were in the company. And it turned out that most of the people were coming from 2 platoon, which was my platoon. We had 1 platoon, which was Assault Pioneers. We had only a handful of them going, but mostly they were coming from the rifle platoon, 2 platoons. So figured out who was going. And we had to go to the TA centre that day because the OC was going to come in with the PACO, the permanent staff admin officer, to run us through. So instead of having weekend plans like I wanted to do, I got on the train and went there, and then we had a meeting in the bar. So everyone's just wearing the pirate rig, the scruffy clothes and things. The major said he knew it was coming, but he kept it to himself. And, between the company majors, they'd already selected who would be putting together this composite company before going up. And that we would form up at Chilwell, which is in Nottingham, the Reserve Mobilisation Centre. I don't know if it's still a mobilisation centre, but we were to form up there. So we did a little bit of extra training on weekends and Tuesdays at Gloucester, which is where I was from. And then we went to Chilwell en masse in minibuses to start getting received equipment, dental check, injections, welfare check, and the all-important money, because, I don't want to get private pay. I want to get my bank clerk pay. So
that's interesting. So you never lose out financially if you're deployed, do you? Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, they had to make up the pay. So, like I said, I was on pretty good money for someone my age. We had a corporal who was a qualified solicitor, so he was taking home more than the 2 IC of the company. So more than the junior and possibly not the senior officers, but he was some good wedge, particularly for the privates who were drawn from generally trade. And we had like a high school teacher high school teachers get good money, don't they? And people who work plant machinery, they get good money. So you don't lose out by being deployed.
So you're in this formed company, Salamanca Company, which is the first formed reservist unit in a ground holding role in almost 50 years. The training that you carried out then, was that the same as a regular army unit would train before deploying off?
Yes, it was. And it's interesting that you should bring that up, because I listened to a podcast of yours from a little weeks ago, Mr. Matt Mayer, who was from the PWR. He was our direct, on paper, he was the officer in charge of our company for the deployment. Although he was sent to Alamara and we were sent to Basra, he was on paper responsible for us. So all our training, we were bolted in with Mr. Mayer's PWR. So for the entire pre-deployment, we went where they went, we went with them.
Oh, that's interesting. And you obviously talked about the diverse employments that many of your colleagues had. How did that impact the unit's teamwork, training and overall performance during that preparation for the tour?
I don't know, because I don't know what really to compare it to. I guess there was good camaraderie when you see the other people working. You all know each other and that sort of thing. But I guess the one hangover from the reservists is your kind of reputation is your reputation both as a soldier and outside, because I knew people outside of the TA. So, if they were coming to the bank, I'd know, oh, that's the guy from Mint. So you kind of had a feeling that you wanted to prove yourself to the people in your company, because you weren't just there as a soldier. And if you messed up, you then, well, forget it. They'll forget about me in the future. Now you're going back to Gloucester, you're going back to Cheltenham, and you will be seen and known and remembered. So you'd always have this reputation with you. So I think the biggest thing was that you wanted to try your very hardest, not just for the sake of your reputation, but because, you wanted everyone else who's from your community to give you the same back to you. That's how I felt anyway.
No, that's interesting. It's sort of additional pressure on you from a perspective that I wouldn't have thought about. But talking of perceptions then, before deploying, what were your perceptions of the mission in Iraq? And how do those expectations compare to what you actually experienced on the ground? And we'll talk about on the ground later on, but I'm just interested in sort of those initial thoughts.
We know better now, don't we, about Iraq?
Especially that tour.
Especially that tour, yeah, especially TELIC. But I did phase 1 training. The troops were going in. And so it was on the front page of the Sun and the Mail and the Daily Angry or whatever newspaper you happen to read. And it would make up a good amount of the content. So yeah, I was quite interested in it. I've always had an interest in the army. Afghanistan had been going on for, about a year and a half since then. Bosnia, Kosovo, they'd only just finished, and the Gulf War still in living memory for a lot of soldiers who were still in the military. So yeah, I felt good about it. I didn't feel like we'd been misled about anything. I thought, well, if I was 19, of course, and didn't know any better, if the government says there's WMDs or Saddam needs to be removed, then yeah, I agree with that. I'm going to go in, I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to make life better for the people in Iraq. That's how I really felt about it. I didn't know any better at the time. This is what we're supposed to do. And then once we arrived in Iraq, that's the mindset that really carried me through. Obviously, there was I want to prove myself to my peers and I want to help them out. But I also wanted to do my job well whilst I was on the ground. So I tried my hardest with all of the tasks that came my way.
When you ask questions like that, you do have to be very wary that you're not answering in hindsight, because the Iraq War has become very tainted. A feeling that I certainly had after deploying there that we were lied to. I was on TELIC 4 as well as TELIC 1. And I think by TELIC 4, it was starting during that tour. Why we were there was starting to be questioned, I think, a lot of the times. I don't know what your feeling is.
There were some American contractors I remember seeing. He was an American dog handler, PM, a private military contractor, and he used to take his dog for a walk around the base. But whenever he saw us, because he had not a walking stick, but he just used to have a cane, just like a swagger stick. And he sometimes he'd swing it backwards and forwards, pretending it was a mine detector saying, "You've got my dog, I'm looking for these WMDs, I ain't found him yet." And so there was the feeling like, oh yeah, well, maybe there aren't any WMDs. And things were coming out in the Daily Mail and the Telegraph about who's that doctor who was very, very quiet, and all of a sudden he was silenced for whatever reason. And I thought, wow, maybe there's something to it. But I didn't feel that was the overwhelming pressure for me. I still felt when I was there, like I said, yeah, we're here, and it's a good reason that we're here, because we're going to make things better for the Iraqis. I was young, I was wet behind the ears, believed what I was told, and thought, yeah, we're here because that's what they said.
I think most soldiers, when they're young and have that idealism, and as you get older and more experienced and more cynical, that tends to leave you, I think.
I would have asked more questions. I should have really asked the senior NCOs what they thought about the whole thing. I didn't.
So how were you received by the regular soldiers that you worked with in theatre?
Well, we trained with the PWRR, and we had a good relationship with them when we were training. We went through the entire build-up package, training package with them. And then once we arrived in Iraq, we were assigned a force protection role at Basra Palace, which was which is the headquarters for the Coalition Provisional Authority. And really, we were the largest residential unit because we had company strength. Every other British unit there was a light age detachment, or just a small support unit for us as a force protection company, or for the other units on the base, for example, the private protection for the consulate, or the Iraqi police training units and those sorts of things. It was all built around that. So I think as the largest unit, I wouldn't even be sure they knew we were reservists. The only giveaway really is that we had such a diverse number of berets on display whenever we were walking around. I wouldn't say that we were treated any differently. I certainly don't recall any. I remember seeing a bit like toilet graffiti set up with stabs or stupid TA bastards, some weekends and Tuesdays, SWAT, those sorts of things. But no one ever said anything to me, and I can't recall anyone being spoken to in a belittling way by any of the regs.
Yeah, I think by the very fact that you're out there, I think that's one thing about the army, the regimental rivalry, whether it's between the territorials or the regulars or the different regiments within the army. My experience is once you go in operations, that rivalry is there, but it's less of a piss take. It's less vindictive, if you like, because at the end of the day, you're all soldiers in operations trying to achieve a common goal.
Yeah, that's right. I think what you say that about regimental rivalries, I would have guessed that the regimental rivalry was bigger than the terms of your employment rivalry. I mean, despite the fact we were reservists, we were reservists and badged into whatever regiment we were badged in. The rivalry was probably bigger between me being at Gloucester and my best mate being in the light infantry. There's a bigger rivalry there. My beret's better than yours, sort of thing.
Yeah. So you arrive in Basra. And I think, did you guys deploy in the April or the March? I can't remember when you got there.
That's right, yeah. We landed in 16th of April.
So just as the weather was
Basra.
getting nice and hot, it started to heat up then. But
yeah,
apart from the climate, what stood out most in those first few days for you? What do you remember?
The smell, man. The stank. I mean, we're at Cyber Logistics Base. That was all right. And Shaibitha, it was nice then. I thought, imagine being force protection at this base. That'd be great, wouldn't it? You got plenty of welfare facilities, lots of grub. It's big, wide base and in the middle of nowhere. So if you're doing external patrols, it'd be dead easy. But we drove into the city. We came over a humpback bridge, which separated really that rural area from the city area. And there's just garbage. And it stunk. I'm sure you remember. It was bad. And it took a lot of getting used to. It's just the kind of smell you can't get used to unless you're exposed to it constantly. But it got there in the end. But that was my first time, more than the heat. It was the smell of the place. And I thought, bloody, this is bad, isn't it? And again, there was me thinking, well, we can sort this out once we've established law and order, and the Coalition Provisional Authority will make sure they got garbage bin and everything will be clean. Everything, well, obviously not, but that was what I was thinking. I thought we were there to save the day, including this garbage problem.
For civilians that are listening and haven't been, the smell is mainly down to open sewers, litter everywhere, dead animals that don't get cleared up. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, and the live animals leaving their droppings everywhere as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly a assault on the senses. And then as the summer gets on, the heat amplifies it, and it's even worse. So you've got acclimatized. I'd imagine there's been some sort of RSOI, it was called, reception staging and onward integration, where you do some ranges. Was there a little bit of training and heat acclimatization, or were you straight into it?
Yeah, 7 days. We had 7 days at Shaiba, which is where we did our acclimatization, mostly just fitness and shooting. That's all we did. We also issued some specialist equipment that we didn't have in the UK before we deployed the night vision, line thermal scopes, those sorts of things. And we got issued our vehicles as well, which happened to be not snatch Land Rovers, the mobile coffins. We had the one down from there. We had Wolf, just unarmored, same thing that a farmer drove, but in dark green. So we issued our.
And did you have the Hesco Bastion wire basket round it? Or did you not?
That's right. We had a wire basket around it, and we put our riot shields on the wire basket with the with bungees, and we didn't have any hickory sticks. We didn't have anything for riot control. So Mark Hill, who's the corporal who was from the stores, he got a hold of a load of broom handles, drilled a hole in the end, and put a bootlace through it. So we had about 20 broom handles to hit people with if the worst came to worst.
That improvisation and making do, it never gets any better. I mean, I remember when I got out there and saw those snatches, and you could still, if you remember, you could still see the confidential telephone line outline in some of them.
Yeah, and ours were green, so they weren't even desert scheme. So they were. And
they were, couldn't defeat a lot of the munitions that the IRA were using, so why they thought they would be a good fit out in, well, they didn't think the trouble would evolve the way it did. What kind of tasks and operations were you typically involved in during a tour?
Well, our task and operations kind of developed over time. We started off as a force protection company. When I got told we were a force protection company, I was like, I've never heard that word before. So I had to ask someone, what does that mean? And so we're going to be doing guard duty. And I thought, oh, great. I guess that's kind of safe. We're behind a fortification and there'll be lots of reinforcements if something goes wrong. Yeah, fine. I'll do that. And that's what we did basically for the first 6 weeks. But then after that, they had the elections, as you remember, in Basra, and it was kind of like the wind down of the CPA, the Coalition Provisional Authority. And so as they wound down, our tasks sort of ramped up and we started getting a patrol footprint. We started patrolling pink sector, yellow and green of Basra, which is the south of Basra, as well as the rural areas. And we used to patrol the marshes on the other side of the Shatal Arab River as well. So what happened was we started off just doing very short range patrols, very quick ones, maybe 2 or 3 hours at most, and a lot of guard duty in QRF, quick reaction force duties. That changed considerably once the CPA left and we started becoming an infantry company with a patrol area.
And during that time, we've had Matt Mayer on doing a couple of podcasts, but obviously you got Alamara up in the north, which was quite a hotbed of violence. Was that mirroring down in Basra as well, or was Basra just ticking along with an occasional bit of violence, or were you seeing that escalation happening the way it was in Panalmara?
It definitely did escalate, yeah, because at first we didn't get any problems at all for weeks and weeks and weeks. We got lulled into a false sense of security, really. So like I said, arrived on 16th of April, we did a week's build up, and then it wasn't until sort of like the 14th of April which was the same day as the Battle of Danny Boy, I think, 14th of May rather, that we started to get IDF and people contacting us whilst we were on patrol. And it did go up noticeably, but I don't think, well, we certainly didn't get hit as hard as they did in Al-Amara. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that Basra was a very, very, very well-resourced city. I mean, you had a lot of had a lot of British bases around. You had the hospital, you had the old Bath Party HQ, you had Camp Breadbasket with the Lancers nearby. So it was very easy to put a surge force in when trouble happened, and that did happen. I think Al-Amara, they had less resources, but more vulnerable, and they were seen as a target of opportunity for that kind of unconventional warfare in a way which we couldn't be.
Did you have much interaction with the Iraqi police or army in Basra at the time?
Yeah, I never saw the army, but Basra Palace became a training hub for the Iraqi traffic police. We had a huge number of police squad cars brought in, brand spanking new, and just lined up around the perimeter of the base. And then they started to train there because there's a large road network inside Basra Palace. They started to train the traffic cops up there. So we had a lot to do with it because we saw them all the time. In fact, a few of our NCOs were even seconded for training duties. And then out on patrol, from time to time, brought either the white-shirted cops, who were the traffic cops, or the blue-shirted cops, who were the federal police, with us on patrol.
And obviously, as this violence escalated then, you saw a rise in IEDs and militia activity. How did your unit adapt to these threats? Were you getting regular int briefs? Were you getting tactics, techniques and procedures updated? Or were you just doing stuff ad hoc and learning as you went?
Mostly it was just learning as we went. The first thing we got taught for counter IED tactics was a 5 and 20 checks, that 5 meter and 20 meter checks, or a thorough check of once you dismount 5 meters around you, and then a cursory check of the 20 meters for places where IEDs could be put in any sort of receptacle, like a dustbin or a drainage cover or something. We carried 2 kinds of ECM with us. I can't remember what they were called now, but they were huge, sort of like radio backpack pieces of equipment, very, very heavy. All right in a vehicle, but if you're carrying them, about 20 pounds on top of everything else you had to carry because the battery and the cooling unit. And that was our only sort of defense, was to check places for IEDs. And then we had our ECM with us, which was constantly on whenever we were on patrol. We just had to adapt to it. Biggest threat we had possibly from IEDs when we were given convoy duties, obviously the logistics squad had to get from Shaiba to Basra and Basra to Shaiba and back for resupplies if helicopters weren't available. So we had to join on their convoys a lot of the time. And because we were infantry and they were logistics, that kind of IED search was left to us. So it was very, very stop-start, slow-moving and frustrating. But we didn't learn anything for countering IEDs other than go and see where you think an IED might be, which, the face of it's like a bad idea because you're going to get blown up. But someone's got to do it. And normally it's a private's job, and I was a private. So I was always just looking down bins or lifting up drain covers or putting my head underneath culverts and things and looking for. I found some explosives a few times. They were just like discarded munitions from the Iran-Iraq war, but luckily we never found an IED. We were hit by them a few times, but we never actually found one and got blown to bits.
Your 5 and 20 meter checks in your ECM, had you had training in that prior to deployment, or is that something you're taught once you're in situ?
We got taught about ECM on a 2-hour lecture. Electronic countermeasures at 2-hour lecture in our first week of pre-deployment training at Tregantle Fort. And we were, in clip, man. We were really tired. We'd been on the ranges, we'd done a lot of fitness. And so this lesson came after evening meal one evening. And we wanted to go and get a drink, but we didn't get a drink. We had to go into this lecture. All right. So the NCOs were at the back base with these broom handles to hit people over the head if they started nodding off whilst the captain, the 2IC, was delivering this, and say, well, you can't make notes. It's confidential. So just remember what we tell you. You can't make notes. And I was like, okay. My takeaway from the lesson, which is the only lesson that we got on ECM, is if you turn the power on, that'll stop ECMs. If you turn the power off, that'll make IEDs more risky. That's it. So just carry this, turn the power on, start walking. That was the training. I mean,
obviously, as you say, it's quite a sensitive subject, and we've got to be careful how much detail we go into. But hearing that is a surprise to me, because if there's 2 things came out of Northern Ireland, it was the 5 and 20s and the ECM capabilities and how to patrol with both those and use them effectively in order to protect yourself. The institutional memory in the British Army, I just think, is appalling at times.
I think it is. I think it's a short-term memory, because I think the people who remember it get promoted up, and then the ones who are coming in, they don't have that experience. So the ones that get promoted up and leave, well, they're busy with other tasks now because they're more senior. They got more pressing concerns. They can't go back down to this sort of tactical unit level things. But half of me would say that the reason we didn't get much ECM training is because perhaps as a force protection company, they weren't expecting us to go on patrol anyway. And so maybe it wasn't that important. As it happens, we did a lot of it in the end. But yeah, what we got taught was 5 and 20s, which was something we just built into every exercise that we did. We had a couple of permanent staff instructors with us who always said, don't forget 5 and 20s. And then the ECM was just a pain to carry because it was so bloody heavy, you know what I mean? On top of everything else, you got this massive sort of piece of electronic kit, which is not especially comfortable. So carrying it was more of a pain. If the ECM, you value it more now. I think I probably did do something, but at the time I think, really, I got to carry that on top of everything else. Yeah. So we didn't have much exposure to it. No. Counter IED.
No, it's and again, there's a bit of hindsight for me coming in here because again, at this time, I think sort of TELIC 4 was when things really started to change and the attacks on the British forces in Basra and elsewhere became a lot more amplified, and I think it caught the British Army on the hop. But is there a particular patrol incident or human interaction that really sticks with you from that deployment?
We'd had this one patrol. It was quite early on until it was about a month on into the tour, and so we'd like I said, we had a little bit of interaction with the Iraqi coppers. And I could speak Arabic. Language has always been an interest to me. I've got enough space in my brain for one extra language. So I learned French at school and I could do that. Arabic in the army. So I could speak a reasonable amount with these coppers. And there was an Iraqi corporal sergeant in the police and he could speak. So I spoke to him quite a lot as well. But they were due to join us out on patrol for Iraqi coppers. They wanted to go to Basra Hospital because they wanted to go and lift someone who was conducting hostile reconnaissance on the hospital in an effort for an attack. That's the intelligence that they had. So we're looking for someone in a Toyota pickup truck. Okay, well, every car is a pickup truck or a taxi, so they're stuck in a lot of cars. And they said, well, our major said, okay, well, in support of local operations, we'll send a section. There's only 8 of us to help these 4 Iraqi coppers. So we met them in the base, and only 3 of them turned up. 1 of them didn't turn up in the end. And we head out on patrol, and they didn't have torches. Between them, they had 1 AK, 2 Markov pistols, and no torches, no radios, no handcuffs. So once they found this guy, I was like, well, how are you going to arrest him? You're just going to shoot him or execute him on the spot? In the end, it didn't matter. They just went between lampposts, and every time a likely car came, basically every pickup truck came along with 1 occupant, they would stop it and talk to them. And our boss had split us into 2. 1 fire team on the ground, 1 fire team on Overwatch on a higher up building. And it was all going fine. It was dark. It's starting to get a bit cooler, which is nice because you put up with that desert heat all day. Once the sun goes down, the temperature's still hot, but it's noticeably different to the daytime temperature. So it felt quite good. And then all of a sudden, I was running towards where everyone else was running. I don't remember hearing any gunfire or anything, but someone had been shot because this Iraqi corporal sergeant, this supervising police officer, he was rolling around on the ground. And the lieutenant who I was following, he turned and pointed, so sought him out because I was carrying the medical equipment. I'd done an extra 5 days worth of training, so that made me qualified to treat gunshot wounds, obviously. So this guy was rolling around, and I took the med kit off, and I happened to have the ECM in there as well, so it was really heavy. So the first thing you do is a primary survey. Where's this guy been hit? Right, been hit in the shoulder. I don't know what by. But his shoulder was basically not there, just the tendons underneath that sort of like held it to the body. So he was rolling around and that arm was like just limp and lifeless. It was kind of grotesque. But I thought, okay, we've got to stop the bleeding. So I got out the first field dressing, put that on. Blood just came straight through it. You could feel it pumping into my hands. Got another one, put that on. Blood came straight through, wouldn't stop the bleeding. So I thought, what am I going to do now? We hadn't been given much first aid kit. My first aid kit was basically surplus first field dressings. I didn't have any tourniquets, so I went to Halford's pre-deployment and bought myself some bungees to use as tourniquets. And I had some bags of fluid with the needles and the transmission lines, but I'd never been shown how to use them. So I was just carrying it for the sake of carrying it. So how am I going to arrest this bleeding? I thought, well, I'm going to try and tourniquet it. That'll work. But of course, there's nothing to tourniquet that far up on the torso. But that was where my mind was at the time. So also I was trying to figure out what to do for this guy. There's this burst of fire and that came overhead, and I don't remember the sound coming overhead, but I do remember the bullets impacting on the floor. And to me, that sounded like a pneumatic drill, just like a kind of high-pitched disintegration sound. I'm sure other people would say it sounded different for me. It's just that perceptual distortion, which made me get really someone's, oh, fuck me, what's going on? I'm going to get killed here. But luckily at that time, the security guards at the hospital, who are armed identically to the cops, they came and dragged him away and held the first field dressings in place. And they picked me up by the patrol pack that was on side, pushed me the way I should be going. And the first bit of cover I got to was one of those old-fashioned newspaper stands. You know, the box on a leg.
Yeah, that made a tin, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was behind that, and this is good. This is not good cover. The bullet was going straight through this thing. So I had to go and find some more cover. When I go and find some more cover, tripped over another Iraqi policeman that was lying on the floor. And I looked at him. He was lying face down. I couldn't tell where he was hit, so I just grabbed him under the armpits and ran him back the way I came to the security guards. I fell over whilst I was dragging him, so I ran backwards. And when I went to look down, I saw there was blood coming out of his leg onto his white trainer sneaker. So I thought, obviously, a leg injury. So I thought, I'm going to go and treat that now because I'd seen it. But before I could start treating, the guards came out and they dragged him into hospital as well. So I sort of ran back towards the firefight. And of course, so the whole section's been returning fire because it's, they're getting themselves in cover. And I've been busy dealing with these two casualties, or rather trying to help these two casualties. I don't think I did a very good one. No, I didn't do a very good job treating them because they both died. But I've got myself composed and I thought, okay, I've got to find the rest. Oh, bloody hell, where's the rest of the section? Because they've been doing stuff and this must have been a few minutes, and a few minutes is a long time in a firefight. So I just shouted out, 40, who's my best mate from the light infantry. I said, 40, where the fuck are you? And he was nearby and he shouted back, over the fucking fence. And I looked at this fence, which was to my right, and it was taller than me. I'm a shade over 6 foot. So with my heels on, slightly over 6 foot. And that fence was taller than me. It was 7 or 8 foot tall. I said, how'd you get over that? And I'm not going to drop a C-bomb, but that's what he called me. He said, jump over that. So I did, Olympic style. I didn't stick the landing very well, but I got over quickly. And some more shots came, and they hit the ground. I crawled, and then I got behind what probably used to be a planter in the hospital grounds. It was just full of dust and dirt, but it probably in its time was a nice flower bed, nice raised flower bed. I got behind that. Okay. And I looked over at 40 and he was out of breath too. So he'd obviously been doing something, and he gave me a target indication for where I should be shooting. And I had the briefest look at the person who was shooting at us before he got himself back into cover. And he was behind maybe a makeshift barricade. It looked like breeze blocks to me through the SUSAT, those times 4. It could have been something else. I thought it was breeze blocks. And so I put a couple of rounds into that, hoping that there'd be enough velocity in the 5.56 to go through. Probably didn't hit anything, but maybe encouraged him to keep his head down. And then I got back behind that cover and I was like, this is a stupid place to be, man. I can't wait to get back to get an egg banjo. And I never got that egg banjo. It sucked. So all that hard work, and I had to make do with one of those shitty McVitie's 11Z cakes, which were no good. I wanted egg on toast and I never got it. So that was a hell of a awakening. And I grew up quick because of that firefight.
And reading your book, I got the impression that was a turning point for you in a lot of respects. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh yeah, it was all fun and games until you start getting shot at, and then I started taking the whole thing a lot more seriously. During training, it was training, and then we not really had much trouble beforehand, so I didn't feel any different to the soldier who was there at Oakhampton or Thetford or wherever he happened to be training. I just felt like the same guy. That firefight is a threshold was crossed then, and it's actually really, like, you start taking it seriously, otherwise you're going to end up the same way as those two coppers. And I didn't want to be one of them.
For reservist soldier, you've got a number of balances, and when you're back in the UK, you've got work-life balance, you've got your commitments to the military, and you've got your family. So for you, how did you cope in that high-threat environment and with staying in contact with your family? And did you also have any contact with your work, or did you just say, right, that's it, I'm on operations now, I don't care about work?
I didn't have any formal sort of... I had mates at work, and they sent them blueies, and they sent blueies back. And the same for my family. They sent them blueies, they sent blueies back. E-Bluey was coming online then as well, because E-Bluey didn't particularly exist back then. So I was getting a few printed blueies as well. But most of my contact back home with work, friends, family was by handwritten letters coming to and from. Occasionally we get hold of a sat phone and be able to make a call, but the calling card only lasted 20 minutes. And, so if you've got 20 mates, you can only speak 1 minute per person. And my family, they were split up, my mum and dad. So if I called my mum, I had to call my dad because the word would get through the grapevine that he called me but didn't call him. And so sort of like family jealousy, this is a legacy from the way their relationship ended. So I had to think, okay, so who am I going to call? Make sure that I had enough calling cards to do it and enough time allocated to me on the phone, because it's not just me who wants to use the phone. We only got one handset, the whole company of lads who want to use it. So I had to really sort of pre-plan phone calls home. And so for that reason, I preferred just writing a bluey.
For a regular soldier, they have a regimental support network for wives, partners, that type of thing. There'll be things, clubs put on for the wives, trips out for the wives. Do you think it was harder for your family because, and I'll quote this next bit, and I don't mean this in a derogatory manner, just a reservist rather than a long-term regular? Do you think your family missed out on that support that they perhaps could have had?
They had one family day over the 6 months at the Gloucester TA Centre. So that was the 16, because 16 of us from Gloucester, so the 16 families went, and the CQMS had put on a curry lunch for them or something like that. The local press turned up for it. So that's the only thing that I remember them. Maybe something else happened, but that's the only thing I remember them telling me about. And of course, only one half of my family could go because they didn't get on with the other half. So my mother's side of the family went. My father's side of the family couldn't go to that.
And after that contact that you described so vividly there, how did the rest of the tour pan out for you?
You know, I was a shit soldier. Army, I was awful. The only reason I was in the army because I liked the army. I liked the uniform. I like dressing in green. I like playing hide and seek, that sort of thing. Right? So that stopped there and then. I thought, you've got to be a good soldier if you want to get through this sort of thing. Because if this happens again, you only survived that because of luck. Right? You didn't do anything right. So I thought, well, things are going to change now. You know, I was just monging it most of the time. I was really, really fit. That was the problem with me. I was 19. I was very, very fit. So, you know, they could assign you a task. I could do it, just turn off the brain and engage the legs, you know. I wasn't really thinking tactically or strategically about anything. I was, this is fun. This is good. I'm enjoying that. That stopped immediately. I thought, okay, because if this happens again, your chances are slimmer. Yeah, how many times are you going to roll the dice? Sooner or later, it's going to turn up as snake eyes, isn't it? So I thought that's got to stop.
And there's a couple of funny bits in your book where you mentioned that you had a bit of an attitude. I think there's a bit where you're doing PT, and because of your fitness, you're running past officers and that and saying, "Oh, see you at the end of can't you run any faster, sir?" So, how did your attitude change over that time?
My attitude didn't change because I'm just I'm a chatterbox. Okay. So me running past them is because, you know, I could have held a conversation with anyone at the time, but it was actually the major, as the OC. He had done the BPFA basically with every platoon. So it was like the 5th time doing it for the day. So he was obviously in the mood for something. Little twat like me to come and say, "Come on, sir, keep up," as I'm zooming past him. The RSM made it clear to me in no uncertain terms that you don't speak to a commissioned officer no matter where you are in that sort of case. I think it was the old threat of rip my arm off and hit me the soggy end or something. He was going to do that. And I took him quite seriously. Our RSM was a scary bloke. So that stopped. But being a chatterbox, you know, it is another part in the book I talk about. His general turns up and they say, well, Matt's a chatterbox. He doesn't have a Southwestern accent and he can hold a conversation. So stick him in the ops room and get him to make the tea for the general. So it you know, worked out in the end.
And obviously, your tour's progression, the violence is increasing. You get into that last month of the tour, and that's always a strange time because that's when you start thinking that, trying to think of the right adjective, not a fear, but you start getting maybe a bit superstitious that something's going to happen to you in the last month. I don't know if you had that. I think a lot of soldiers do.
I didn't have that. I didn't experience that. I was on countdown since the day I arrived. So I was like, I only got, you know, 5 months and 29 days to go. I was counting down.
Yeah, chuff charts.
Once I arrived. Exactly. We had a chuff chart and there's a guy called Uzi was in charge. And you know, like Uzi submachine gun. He wasn't called Uzi because of his, because he was hard or anything, because he had strabismus, so his misaligned eyes. And so whenever he looked at someone, he'd say, "Who's he looking at?" But in a Cornish accent, I go, "Who's he looking at?" So his name became Uzi. He was in charge of the chuff chart, and he was a real tough guy. In fact, he went on to make a full-time career in the military after TELIC. So he obviously, I wouldn't say enjoyed it, but he obviously felt at home there. Me, on the other hand, I didn't feel very much at home. So when it got to that last month, I was just looking forward to it. I was thinking, what am I going to do when I get home? Okay, well, I'm going to do this, and this. I'm going to spend my money on this, and this, and this is what I'm going to do. And so my survival technique for get that last month was just a daydream or about what I wanted to do once I got back.
What was your reintegration like once you returned? Did you feel supported by the army and your civilian employer? Sorry.
No, we didn't get anything right. So we came back. So they stuck us on a plane. We flew out of Kuwait, landed in Qatar, swapped over to Qatar, went back to Bryce, got on the coach, went to Chilwell, handed all the kit back in after cleaning it, and then we just went back to the TA centre. Our respective the company split up. So we didn't do any sort of decompression or anything like that. But we were called back in for a compulsory weekend about a month afterwards, and they gave us all a tenner and sent us to Taunton. And Taunton was nothing in Taunton anyway, so we could get 3 pints out of tenner back in the early 2000s. So that was our decompression, a tenner and a night out in Taunton. We didn't have any officers to welcome us back, or senior members of the government, or even a junior minister or anything. We just came back and went back to our lives. Now, the world of finance, they don't do charity. It's all about profits. So they wanted me back as soon as I could. They weren't interested more. What was it like? What did you do? And they wanted you back so you could start making more money for them. So they didn't really give me any sort of reintegration. They said, well, tell us when you're going back. And so I gave them a date, and they said, okay, well, your desk's rating. Hurry up. So I had nothing, and from either side of the spectrum.
And were there any surprises in how colleagues and family and friends reacted to you? Did they treat you differently? Did they have a macabre interest in what you might have done?
Is there always the sort of like cliche, did you shoot anyone? Someone said, did you shoot anyone? I said, I don't know, I didn't check. I mean, I shot at them. I didn't check to see if I'd shot them on. My name's not on the bullet. I don't know. And, the militias, they had their own casualty extraction techniques, so they did very seldom a body to check. They didn't want to leave any evidence behind of what they've been up to, right? So yeah, I'd shot at people, yeah, but had I shoot anyone? I doubt it. Everyone was shooting it. It could have been mine or the person next to me or someone else. That was the only sort of thing people were interested in asking. And then the other question was, say, what was it like? And that's such a hard question to quantify, especially in casual conversation. I mean, I don't want to say, oh, well, I sort of go into the psychology of what it's like to be an infantry soldier. So I just say, oh, it was hot and smelly. So that was that normally killed the conversation there and then, because they thought, oh, maybe he doesn't want to talk about it, or maybe that satisfied their curiosity, one or the other.
There's a person in the book you mentioned, Corporal Hill, and his death had an impact on you. Can you just tell us a little bit about Corporal Hill and why the impact of his death was so telling?
Corporal Hill, Mark Hill, he was in his late 40s when he went in. He was the CQMS's corporal, so he was in the stores, and he was from Gloucester. We didn't have any officers from Gloucester. He was basically the senior bod from Gloucester, and I'd known him for a while beforehand. Back to what we were saying earlier, that, there's this kind of this structure of reservists. You kind of know people outside of the military, you know them at home. He worked in the same factory as my uncle. So he knew lots of other members from the TA. They worked in the same, as an undercarriage manufacturer for Airbus, based in Gloucester. So he worked there. And so Mark had a tough tour. He was in an ambush where they were hit with an RPG. There were casualties, fatalities and casualties as well. The guy that was with him got shot in the guts, and he basically disemboweled him whilst Mark was trying to drive the truck. Right. So the stress kind of built up, and we thought it was all right. We all thought we were all right. We all got back safely, and we had this sort of like press thing where they provided us with beer and pizzas, and everyone seemed all right. And I'd gone swimming because I like swimming, and I got a message from my dad, and he said, oh, he just gave it to me plain because he's a policeman, and so his method of giving so Mark Hill's died. And I was like, really? And I was like, what's happened? And the thing is, just the stress of it got to him. It wasn't just sort of like, it's hard to quantify. It just wasn't because of the experiences he'd seen. He's just the environmental pressures and the differences in what it's like to be in the UK and what it's like to be over there. And he didn't die. He didn't do himself in or anything. It was just the stress got to him, and his body. I would even argue maybe his soul even gave out. It was just too much. It was a really, really terrible thing. I still get upset about it, It came to the funeral, and obviously the pallbearers were all from the Gloucesters. And there were so many people at the church that we had to lay on coaches. There were 6 or 7 coaches. There's a small pastoral church which got pews for about 80 people at most, and about 400 turned up. So he was really well respected in the community, with us in the TA, and also from work as well. And so he seemed invincible in Iraq, and before then as well, because he was basically the only guy I knew when I joined the TA, because I just kind of knew him anyway because he was a friend of my uncle. He was kind of like a father figure. I was 19, I turned 20, he was 47. So, he was like, oh, if there was a problem or I needed anything. And here's the thing, right? I'm an unlikely soldier. I'm a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian since 8 years old. This guy made sure that I got vegetarian meals in the middle of the desert, right? So he took care of me, right? And all of a sudden he was gone, and I wasn't even expecting it. So it was a hell of a hit.
Were you aware of PTSD and other psychological issues like that after that tour? I
wasn't aware of PTSD in the way it manifested itself, being the symptoms within myself or within other people or whatever. To me, PTSD was something that you got from Vietnam. So, it meant you drank too much and you had red eyes. and you carried on wearing your Vietnam shirt, no matter where you went, that sort of thing. That's what PTSD was to me at that age. Of course, I know a lot better now, but no, we didn't have trim, or any mental
risk management.
Yeah, nothing like that. Like I said, once we came back, they just gave us a tennis and go on the piss and then go back to work. And that's what we did. So
for listeners who might not know, trauma risk management was something that started off in the Royal Marines, I believe. And basically there'd be like if somebody was killed or badly injured in a contact, there was people called trim practitioners who were trained in how to just basically sit the group of people down and talk through what happened and let the feelings get out. I mean, that's a very broad brush, but that's what it was. But I still find it quite interesting that PTSD back even in the early 2000s was still a bit unknown. And I've mentioned it a few times on the podcast where I interviewed a friend of mine, Neil, when two of our guys in our troop were killed in Londonderry in 1989. And we knew absolutely zero about PTSD. And I did not know our effect as his colleagues when he told us that him and another couple of guys were having such bad nightmares from PTSD that our solution at the time was to put them in a room on their own down the bottom of the corridor so we could get to sleep at night. And it's still quite shocking that 13, 14, 15 years later, the army hadn't progressed that much. It's just, it's quite shocking. They're supposed to be getting there now, but do you have any issues today, Matt, that you want to talk about, or have you sort of coped and moved on?
I was quite badly affected by mental health issues sort of later on. I'd left the army by the time the problems came, but what happened was I was in a very particularly stressful part of my life in my new job as a police officer, rode on my father's first army camp copper. And what happened was I was having a stressful day at work, but every time I went to sleep, I was reliving basically Iraq. If I went to sleep and I get auditory hallucinations, there's 351 radios going off. And once I did fall asleep, I was like on patrol. So I was stressed in the day and I was stressed at night. I was never out of that loop. And it took me about 18 months before I actually managed to get, although I went to the GP and said, I got problems here, I couldn't get any sort of help from the MOD for the best part of 2 years. So they were reluctant to follow up on that issue. In my opinion, they were reluctant, or they were just so overwhelmed that they couldn't. It was either one or the other.
Do you think that was partly because you were a reservist and like you weren't seen as their problem anymore?
Possibly, it could have been. I doubt the bureaucrat knew that who was in charge, knew I was reservist. They would have seen a number and a name and a rank and a operational service date. Whether it was reservist, it probably wasn't even on the form. I just put army because it says army. But it took a while to get the access to the treatment I needed, and so I had to just like stick it out, basically be the lad down the room so the others could sleep. Luckily, I had my own house right now, so I wasn't disturbing anyone. But if I had still been in the military, maybe I'd have been the guy you were talking about just a couple of minutes ago.
We've sort of touched on it already, but with the benefit of hindsight, how do you view Operation TELIC 4 and the role of the reserves in Iraq overall?
Well, the role of the reserves in Iraq, and I'm sure you know better than me, given your previous position, but it's about 20% of the personnel in Iraq after TELIC 4. So 1 in 5. That's a massive part. I think that's going to be the way ahead for the military, because recruitment is such a difficult thing. It's going to be a damn sight easier to recruit a reservist than it is going to be a regular soldier. I think maybe somewhere someone was thinking, well, to what extent can we mobilize and deploy reservists en masse, because it hadn't happened for 50 years. And so that was a good experiment. So that worked well for them. So that was good. On the other hand, a professional soldier, full-time soldier, is a much better resource to have in the field, in my opinion, than someone like me who literally turned up with less than a month's worth of experience before being deployed. So it depends what they want. If they want to have the numbers on the sheet to say we've got this many soldiers, great. Yeah. Okay. If it's a strategically viable asset for the commanders, then you've still got to address this recruitment issue and get people other than reservists to take on the high risk roles.
And what did you do in the army after you came back from TELIC? Did you stay in?
I did stay in for a couple of years. Yeah, actually, I was lucky enough. Our PESO was well clued in with 4-3 Wessex Brigade, and Wessex Brigade had a UOTC, a University Officer Training Corps unit, and I was allowed to leave the TA and become an under officer with the UOTC, the Bristol UOTC. I became a officer cadet, and then finally I managed to get a commission out of the UOTC. And then after that, they said, well, what are you going to do next? You can't stay in UOTC. You're not a student. You're not doing anything. So I took that to the CCF. I became a instructor for the Combined Cadet Force for a few years. And then I left before DPM turned into that new stuff they were.
What made you write your book, Basra and Back, the memoir of an unlikely infantryman in the Iraq War, and where can listeners get a copy?
I wrote it because a lot of books out there, and I'm sure you agree, focus on sort of the sharp edge of soldiering. Constant danger, constant action. You've got the Marines, you've got the Powers, you've got Andy McNabb, right? They are heroes, all of them. I've listened to the guys that you've spoken to before. They are all better soldiers than me. But I wanted to give the most human possible view of modern soldiering that could be constructed, because I've not seen any. I'm a big reader. I love to read. I've never seen a book that really identified the most human basic parts of soldiering. I didn't want to talk about special forces missions in the high risk scenarios. I wanted to portray what it's actually like to live that kind of life when you're not expecting to live it, because it can't get more human than that. And ultimately, at the end of the day, every soldier is just a human, aren't they? No matter how good they are, no matter how excellent they are, in my case, no matter how unlikely they are, they're all humans trying to achieve the same goals. And I wanted to write a book that reflected my feelings on the Iraq, because I would say that the majority of soldiers out there would have had feelings pretty similar to mine. Yeah,
and that is why I read out that introduction right at the start, which was from an email that you sent me, because I thought that beautifully summarised a lot of what you said there. And where can people get a copy of the book?
Well, you can get it on Amazon. It's Basra and Back, or you can use my name, which is Matt Okuhara, Okuhara. Waterstones, W.H. Smiths, all the good stockists have got it, and it's going to be hitting the American shelves on the 30th of October, and that's going through Amazon again and Barnes & Noble.
Well, that's also, your book's also my choice on Desert Island Dits, and I'll give a little overview of what I thought when we get to that section. You're also the author of another book, Nuclear Copper. Can you just give people a heads up?
That's right. Yeah, Nuclear Copper covers my period of 11 years in the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, which is the UK's most heavily armed police force, and they're dedicated to the protection of nuclear material, whether it's in sight, a power station, or in transit. I was on the escort group, so I dealt with things in fuel whilst it was in transit. So we got to play with things like 30mm cannons, miniguns, all whilst wearing a police uniform and sailing fuel around the world. And that's also, if people are interested, where I earned my nickname, which stuck for a while, Princess. And you have to read the book to find out why I'm called that. But Civil Nuclear Constabulary, again, is something that's not talked about or not known about very much. So I decided to put pen to paper and let people know about that as well.
Yeah, and I'll put the links to all those books and the titles, etc., in the show notes. And also, you've got a Twitter presence, which is, can you remind me the handle? Is it at Nuclear Copper, I think?
That's right, yeah, it's Nuclear Copper. Nuclear_Copper.
Yeah, and I'll put that in the show notes as well. So we get on to Desert Island Dits now. Oh no, actually, before we go to Desert Island Dits, Matt, you're very interested in the fact that I'm talking to you now all the way to Japan. I'm very jealous of what you're doing, Matt. Can you just give people an overview of your life in Japan?
Okay, well, I live in Matsumoto City, which is in the center of the main islands of Japan. It's in the mountains. It gets to about 40 degrees in the summer, about minus 15 in the winter with 20 centimeters of snow. My job is to be a performer and interpreter for a samurai display team. So we specialize in the use of samurai-era firearms. People don't often associate firearms with the samurai, but in fact, they had a martial art known as Hojutsu. And our shooting team does displays, skillet arms displays, and also provides extras for movies and dramas in the use of samurai-era firearms. So there's basically wearing all the big black armor and carrying a boomstick. So once we have a skillet arms demonstration, for example, I put the gun to one side, I pick up the microphone, and I translate what the commentator says from Japanese to English.
Fantastic job. Very jealous. And a lot of my friends are into martial arts, and I know you've appeared in a few other podcasts and YouTube videos talking about what you do over in Japan. So if you send me some of those links to those podcasts or YouTube videos, mate, I'll put them in the show notes as well, just to link to people who might have an interest in that type of thing as well.
Super easy to find. The name is Gun Samurai. So the word gun and the word samurai, if you type that in, that'll come up on YouTube, Facebook, Insta, everything like that.
There we go. Fantastic. Desert Island Dits then, what's your choice of book, film and luxury item, mate?
This is my book of choice. It's called A Thousand Shall Fall by Murray Peden. I don't know if you know it. Quite a thick one, so it's a good one to have on a desert island because it takes a long time to read. And it's about a pilot during the Second World War, going from the age of 19, the same age I was when I joined. And he becomes a heavy bomber pilot, starting on short Stirling and finishing up on Royal Air Force B-17s. So he's a very, very unique role during the Second World War. The training at the start, it's very funny, very human. It's very easy to relate to the author. And the action towards the end of the book, when he becomes operational, is gripping. Absolutely fantastic. I don't know why I haven't made a film out of this or a series. It's a brilliant book.
Is that recently published?
It's actually published in the 70s. So it's pretty old. It's for Murray Peden, the pilot is actually Canadian, but most of his crew are from Manchester, also on multi-crewed aircraft. So him and the Bombardier, they're both from Canada, and everyone else is from Manchester. So it's very, very
got a real interest in Bomber Command. I've never heard of that book, so I'll definitely be looking that one up. Another one to add to my Bomber Command fetish, because long-term listeners know, I initially walked into the RAF office and was told to about turn, go out, turn right and join the army. So I'm a closet RAF person in some respects. Film?
Well, my favourite film, and it is coming up to Halloween. I do like ghost films. My favourite film is The Exorcist. The Exorcist. I watch that film once or twice a year. I love that it doesn't use any particularly CGI effect. It all just relies on good acting and a good story. I've read the book as well, of course. That nearly became my book of choice, but I thought I can't bring the book and the film, so I'll just bring the film with me. The Exorcist, especially the extended cut, or even the book where there's a lot more detail. It is a really, really good read, a very good viewing as well.
Was that one of those films in Iraq that you had on permanent loop, or was there something else?
Love Actually is what we had on permanent loop because someone broke the DVD player and we couldn't eject the disc, so it was Love Actually or nothing. So yeah, Love Actually was our film.
Oh, I feel for you, mate. That'd be more traumatic with some of the contacts you endured.
Well, Keira Knightley is on Vogue at the time, and she looked good, man. So,
Yeah, distracting, doesn't it? And luxury item?
Luxury item, it's hard to think of where I was going to take, but I decided that I'd bring a nice bottle of Japanese Yamazaki whiskey with me.
Is that the one that's been winning awards in the blind tasting and things?
Yes, that's the one. It's a very, very nice, very smooth, very easy going. A little bit expensive, but it's a luxury item after all, and that's the one I'd take.
Excellent, mate. Just out of interest, how much would a bottle of that set you back, roughly?
In England, about 50 quid.
Right, okay. Well, my old boss, he came on and he selected Penderyn, the Welsh whiskey, one time.
I know Penderyn. Yeah. I didn't like it so much, Penderyn. It's a bit... the aftertaste came out my nose a bit too harsh. So it's not my particular tipple, but, Yamazaki, the Japanese whiskey, very good.
Nice. My choice is Matt's book, and I've picked that because, as Matt said, the reservist experience often goes undocumented from training, fighting, and a post-conflict perspective. And I've got an interest in reserves because, as I said, I spent 2 years serving with the TA as a permanent staff instructor, so I understand the problems faced by the reservists. They turn up to work on a Friday, we drive to the Brecon Beacons, you cross that cattle grid, you get into the hills.
Remember that.
By the church, that rattling sound on the 4-tonner wheels. And the rain would start, and then the snow would start, and then the sun would come out, and then the rain would come back. And they were juggling a very difficult act of family, work, and the army. So I always had respect for people that dedicate themselves on those weekends. And throughout history, the regulars have always acted as a speed bump at the start of a war, and it's normally the reservists that finish it. And I think we've lost sight of that. And the reserves in this country have become increasingly diminished, probably at a point when we really need them, as the army's so small. So, Matt, thank you for coming to the podcast, mate. I've really enjoyed that talk.
Great, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it too. It's my first ever military podcast, so I had a lot to say. I hope I said all the right things, and I hope people find it interesting. I found it interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely, mate. And as I say, your book's well worth the read, and get that reservist experience out there. That's it for another episode. Thanks to our guest for coming on, and to you, the podcast listener, for your continued support and suggestions. Please keep them coming, and our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes. You can find us on all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. And if you download us from iTunes and like the podcast, it'd be great if you could leave us a review there or anywhere you get your podcasts from. Finally, thanks again to Nick Beale for his continuing help and offering technical support for his company ISAR, and we'll see you next time on The Unconventional Soldier.